Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Randye Kaye has two best-selling books, Happier Made Simple and Ben Behind His Voices. These two books are tied to her work as a motivational speaker, a radio and podcast host, an actress, a singer, a teacher, and a mental health advocate. Well, Randye, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure here too. Thank you.
I'm hoping you can start us off by letting us know a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
Love for my son is the second answer to that question. I got into the work of mental health advocacy, specifically about severe mental illness, SMI, because I am the mother of two kids, and my oldest, my son, who for public purposes I call Ben, but not his real name, developed what I learned a few years later, and now know for 20 years, a very severe form of schizophrenia. He began acting strangely in his adolescence, as many adolescents do, but instead of growing out of it, it got worse and worse and worse. So through a series of adventures and misadventures and misdiagnoses, we finally got a diagnosis, and we've been dealing with this horrible, horrible illness for 20 years through periods of success, hope, hospitalizations, fear, crisis, and currently incarceration. So as a result of that, I wanted to advocate for his rights to treatment, for the rights of his illness to receive proper research dollars, to find what works for him, the 4 pillars that hold up his success when he is doing well, to advocate for the rights of families to be involved in treatment, and to just talk about our experience so we can all learn from each other. So that is one of my passions, and out of that grew a passion for mental health in general and helping people to shift their perspectives so that their lives can have more meaning.
Well, congratulations. That's nice to learn about people like you who are advocating. And so what form does that advocacy take these days? I know you have a number of different ways you're pursuing that.
Well, the first thing I did was get involved with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, and I became a family-to-family teacher for them. If some of your listeners are not familiar with NAMI, they do many things, but the arm that I'm involved in is the education arm, because I found that the more I learned about my son's illness, the better I could communicate with him, the better chance I had of not making things worse, the better chance I had of handling the situations. So I became a family-to-family teacher and then a state trainer to train other family members to teach this course, which, by the way, is free. You just have to get into a class by going to your state NAMI website. And out of that, I began to do presentations to hospitals, to families, and people said, "Oh my God, you should write a book." So I eventually took them seriously and wrote a book called Ben Behind His Voices, a memoir with chapter guideposts along the way to help people get through what we got through. At the end of the book, my son was doing okay, never going to be the same as he was, but I had come to a place of acceptance. And since the book came out, we've gone through the roller coaster a few more times, but I wanted to give people hope and also information. Lately, I have taken that book and met 2 other moms/authors/advocates who wrote books about their experience with their sons and schizophrenia, Mimi Feldman and Mindy Greiling, and the 3 of us created a podcast called Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches. And our mission is to bring information to our listeners that they may not have come across before. Different medications that are available, different treatments that are available, what it's like for people so they don't feel alone, different ways of looking at the process through the eyes of providers, psychologists, social workers, siblings, children, spouses, We've had a few people on who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia and talk about their experience. So we have almost 75 episodes so far, and we'll be starting season 4 with an interview with Jonathan Rosen, the author of Best Minds. So we are working to get information out there and help people.
Excellent. May I ask, how old was your son when you finished the book, Ben Behind His Voices?
He was nearly 30, and he's 41 now.
And I'm trying to put together I think you said you're entering your 4th year and you've got 75 podcasts. So they're coming out.
We do about 2 a month, and we call 25 episodes a season. So I don't know that it's 4 years, but the first 25 episodes, we were doing them once a week, and then we just got exhausted. So we just said, we'll do them when we do them. We'll try to do 2 a month, which works out better for us. And they're always available for people. So we have them on YouTube. We have them wherever you get your podcasts. And people are still going back to episode 1 and listening from the beginning. So I'd say we've been at it about 3 years, and then we're starting season 4 in about 6 weeks.
Excellent. I think I heard you say something about 4 pillars. What are the 4 pillars?
So what I've discovered I love my son, and there was a period after the book came out where he had a relapse, but then lived with us for 9 years. With the house rule of, even if you don't think you need medication to live here, you're going to take it, and you're going to let us supervise it. And you don't have to do that, but that means you're out. So with that, I saw him get stable enough to reach out for, and I call that treatment. That's the first pillar. And treatment might be whatever that means to the individual. In my experience, for many, and I dare say for most who have schizophrenia, at least as severe as my son, that does include medication. But medication alone doesn't do it. But treatment might also include a psychologist. It might also include NA meetings or AA meetings. Like, treatment is getting help, basically. So that is pillar 1. Pillar 2 is structure. I think we all do better in structure, but for someone whose mind is constantly racing with a mental illness, having a predictable schedule makes a big difference. Having a job to go to, knowing, that's why sometimes people do better in the hospital, because they know 8 o'clock is breakfast, 11 o'clock is group. I think all of us are comforted by the right amount of structure. And I think structure is very important for mental health in general, for some of us more than for others. But in mental illness, it's a comfort. So, but it doesn't have to be in the hospital. It can be a job. It can be volunteer work. It can just be anything that has some predictability to your day, so you're not living in a constant state of anxiety. The third, and this is no great invention on my part, we all need it, is purpose. Getting up in the morning and knowing why you need to get out of bed. Are you beholden to someone else? Is your life meaning anything? Do you have a job to go to? Are people relying on you? We all need to feel a sense of purpose. And again, really important in stability in mental health and recovery in mental illness. And then the 4th element is, I just call it love, but we can call it community. I know many people with severe mental illness whose families have given up on them, and they are heartbroken about that. And they say to me, "Oh, if only you were my mother." Well, I'm not their mother, and I do what I can to help, but I've got my son's back. But parenting is always that balance of stepping in and letting go, letting people make their own mistakes. You can't always save or enable everybody. We know that. But community, living in a group home, can be such a comfort. Having co-workers, extended family. I think we are a species that needs to belong somewhere. Again, some of us need it to a greater degree than others, but feeling isolated and alone can knock that 4th pillar right out. So a sense of community would be the 4th. So it's community or love, structure, purpose, and treatment.
Very good. Very good. So I suppose that there are times when people will listen to a podcast like ours, the On Your Mind podcast, and we present so many different views about holistic or functional medicine or integrative treatment that tries to look at the whole person, which includes everything you just mentioned, not just the foods I eat or do I get enough sleep, but do I have a sense of purpose? Am I connected in community? Do I have a sense of love in my life? And sometimes people draw the conclusion from that we're against medication. And we certainly aren't, because we know the role that they play in so many different situations that are at that purely physical level, where when they're used appropriately in conjunction with this whole picture, including the food and the sleep and the rest and the purpose and the community and the love, they can save lives, and they do. Mm-hmm. And there are those of us who wouldn't be here if we didn't have the insulin or the medication for type 2 diabetes or et cetera.
Right.
Now, it's also important to understand that education, this thing that you said is so primary for you, is critically important. And if we just rely on what we consider our medical professionals, we don't get a very clean or unbiased communication. This is why books like Anatomy of an Epidemic by Mr. Whitaker are so important, because you'll find a deeper level of research that's more honest and says, yeah, these medications can help people, but they were only ever intended to be in this, like one of the 4 pillars, let's just say.
Okay.
So I'm all for it, and especially when you have a situation like yours. Any of us that have worked in the field long enough or have the mixed blessing of having a family member or a friend who's had that kind of a pattern of diagnosis, we know the value of being able to help them stabilize throughout extended periods, if not forever, using the medication. So.
Yes, and yeah, thank you for saying that. And I'm aware that the other 3 pillars are important. I'm also aware that there are some people suffering from, say, depression, for whom if they stabilize with their meds, and then there have been studies, I know that if they just get outside more, socialize more, and get more exercise, that they start to feel better, and some eventually do go off their meds. So I'm all about a holistic approach in so many ways. The sticking point with schizophrenia is something called anosognosia, which is a condition, a documented medical condition often found in stroke victims, where they don't know they're ill. If any of your listeners have a parent with Alzheimer's, when they get past a certain point, they don't even know they're ill. They just know they don't know who you are and you stole their jewelry. Like, it's real to them. And there is no medication for Alzheimer's. So that is what it is. So my son, some people will say, oh, he stubbornly won't admit he has schizophrenia. No, he simply has no insight into that because his frontal lobes are impaired by the illness. The same way a stroke victim may say, oh, well, that clock, I didn't draw that clock. You just brought that in. So it's not that they gratefully accept these medications. They don't go, oh, thank goodness, I feel so much better. Their reality has been skewed for so long. All they feel are the side effects. And so I saw a speaker once who did gain insight into his schizophrenia and was on his medication willingly, but he talked about all the years he spent not being aware of it. And he had a member of the audience stand up and tell her about his life, tell him about her life. And he said to her, okay, stop for a minute. I'm going to tell you, that husband you tell me you have, you don't have a husband. And that job you say you have, they keep saying, don't show up. You don't even work here. Like, that job is not true. That husband is not true. You don't even really have any children. I know it's real to you, but it's not really there. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you this medication to straighten out your brain, and it's going to make you gain weight, and you're not going to have much sexual desire. But trust me, you have this illness, and this will help you. And he said to all of us, would you take those meds? And it was so eye-opening for me, because I understand for my son, who thinks there's nothing wrong, and anything that might go awry in his life is the employer's fault or the police's fault or his mother's fault. He simply doesn't know that he's
doesn't
ill.
register in his brain. Exactly.
And so without help, I know where he'll be. I always used to say he'll be homeless, dead, or in jail. And now the third thing has come true because he wouldn't. And he's on his medication, but he's using marijuana, and that interferes with everything. And that is when his life on his current medication began to spiral downhill. He started abusing his money. He started lying. This kid who was an amazing, and I believe still is, an amazing, ethical, moral, loving, right person, the combination of inadequate medical treatment for the marijuana, because there aren't many options, and what he's on right now isn't helping that much. It's just quieting some things down. The combination of that and marijuana, which always makes you think you have a great idea until you wake up in the morning not stoned anymore and you go.
And so I think you misspoke once there. So the combination of less than adequate treatment, medical treatment for the schizophrenia.
Yes.
And I think what you said was treatment for the marijuana. And the use of marijuana.
And the use of marijuana.
Yeah. So it is so difficult because there are some people who respond adequately to some of the medications, and then others who have horrible side effects and almost no benefit. And it's just all over the map because...
And it depends on the medication. My son, can I use actual medical names here?
Sure.
Okay. He was on Clozaril for 9 years, taking blood tests every week to make sure he wasn't part of the 0.1% that got agranulocytosis, whatever that small amount is. But he did it on the Clozaril. He got off Social Security. He was a waiter in a restaurant. He leased a car. He paid his bills. He wasn't perfect, but I used to say, we've got him back 65% and we'll take it. When COVID came and he lost his job and therefore all the pillars fell, all three of them, structure, purpose, community, gone, because he worked in the restaurant business and you know what happened to the restaurant business in COVID.
Yes, indeed.
And then he had no money and then he got anxious and then to make himself feel better, he started smoking pot. And then he thought it was a really good idea to refuse his medication. And before you know it, he was back in the hospital. And he would not go back on the Clozaril because it makes him tired. It doesn't compute for him how well he did on it. So now he's on an injectable, which is very convenient, of an old antipsychotic called Haldol. And his hands are shaking and his teeth are black. But he likes the convenience of it. And he says the side effects are less. I can't force him to change meds, nor can his logic centers put two and two together and realize that every single time he was on the Clozaril and sticking to it, he did well. Like, it's just not computing for him. So that is my thing about medication. We all, whether it's cancer, schizophrenia, diabetes, we all wish for better treatments. We all wish for research that will find meds that will totally eliminate COVID and all the things that we're dealing with. And kudos to the people who are doing research. Keep at it. But I don't think schizophrenia gets a lot of research dollars.
So as I hear that, the part of me that likes to generate sadness kicked in. And so in my humanity, I instantly want to run away from the sadness into the happiness. And I know there's a book behind you, Happier Made Simple. But before we switch into that, what are some of the things, not that you use to stay happy? We'll talk about that before we're done. But what are some of the things you use to keep yourself going as you're trying to advocate for your son and his struggles?
That's actually the same question in a way. So thank you for asking it. It's a combination of things. And I think an easiest way to describe it is what happened to me when I got the call that he'd been arrested. First of all, you got to feel the pain. You can't just, your cat dies and suddenly you're like, oh, well, we're fine. Like you have, you're a psychologist. So if there's this, depending on the amount of pain, you need some, I call it processing time or absorption time. You need to feel it. You need to let it sink in. The first thing is always going to be shock. And then, let that not be in your, let the not be in your chest for a while. It's a horrible thing to get a shock or, grief. Another thing that really helps me is taking an action, just any action. I looked up Al-Anon meetings. I didn't go to one yet, but I looked them up just to see that there are some in my neighborhood if I want it. I told what was happening to a few friends, so reaching out to community. And after that, the self-talk, like, okay, it is what it is. What are we going to do now? I'm not going to wish it was different because it isn't different. I'm going to get my information. So it's a combination of acceptance and hoping, and then saying, all right, I've done what I can do. I took my actions. I'm going to do something fun because it is what it is. He's awaiting a court date. I can't do anything else. So I'm going to watch a funny movie, or I'm going to do my podcast, distract myself, because the time is yours. So sometimes it helps to distract yourself with something you love. We actually did a podcast last night talking to other family members, and the last question is, what do you do for joy? And many of them were take a walk, I swim, I talk to my friends, and we concluded with refusing to have joy isn't going to do anybody any good. I love my son, and I will do whatever it turns out will be best for him, which sometimes includes letting him sink. I'm not going to ruin my life or my marriage or my relationship with my daughter and her husband and her kids, because I love a lot of people and I love a lot of things in life. And I'm going to take care of this as best I can and know I've done my best, but I'm not going to believe the myth that you're only as happy as your unhappiest child. I'm not going to buy into that. So those are some of the things that help me. Yeah, if somebody's nice to me and says, oh, I'm so sorry, or, oh, he's such a nice kid, how could that happen? Then I want to cry. And like any grief, you let yourself feel it when you need to feel it. And having a child with a major mental illness is a grief. You lose that child over and over and over again. People who have loved ones with cancer that is in remission and then comes back, you feel that again. So it's a lot of little losses. But I do use life is what you highlight. This is one of the quotes from my book. I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying this is what I live by. Life is what you highlight, savor the best, and learn from the rest. And that helps me. If I can go outside and hear a bird chirp, it helps me. Life is going to go on somehow. And knowing I'm doing my best helps me. Knowing that there are others to help me helps me. I'm so grateful for the social workers and the forensic social workers and the people who are working to get my son into mental health care instead of prison. I'm grateful to the other people. So the gratitude helps a lot too. So those are just some of the things that I use.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember years ago reading the book Happy for No Reason.
Great title.
Marcy Shimoff was the author. And I think she put it out. This is in the early stages of internet access and things. So she put it out amongst her network that she was looking for connections to whoever you think is the happiest person you know. And she went about interviewing, I think she interviewed over 100 people who had been referred to her specifically through the filter of, introduce me to the happiest person you know. And the expectation was that we'd find all these people, the vast majority of whom had wonderfully easy lives, had a silver spoon in their mouths, plenty of money and good health. And what she found was the opposite. These are people who'd overcome adversity in various forms. And so her book was about, I think she took 10 of those 100 and highlighted them in the book. And then she included research about the research results of people who had studied how do you get happier. You do a gratitude journal and you focus on this and that, and you get some exercise and you get a fresh air when you can, all of those practical things. So I'm hoping that when I read your book, Happier Made Simple, I'll find similar things.
I think you will. And thank you. It is very interesting because I did a lot of research in this book, but mostly I wanted to write a book that was easy to read. I'm telling you, it's like a 4th grade reading level. I did that on purpose. I opened so many books, and and I deliberately called it Happier Made Simple because we're not supposed to be happy 24/7. That is not life. Life is feeling the whole thing. Otherwise, where's the contrast? And we're here to experience the entire spectrum of life, but it's about percentages. We all know people who got stuck in a traffic jam and all day long it makes them crabby. Or other people who are like, well, that was fun, and then they laugh it off and they go on to have a good day. So it's about increasing the percentages, and things like money, and it only makes you happy to a point where you can all right, I can survive now. And then it's community, and it's your attitude. My whole book is about what you tell yourself about what happens. So it's kind of like what this book, Happy by Choice, is that what it's called? Happy for no reason. Happy for no reason. It sounds like what she did was similar to what Stephen Covey did with the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. He just interviewed all the successful people he knew and boiled it down to, the end in mind, and you seek to understand, not to be understood, and so on. So my book, all the research, I'm like, all right, see, everyone talks about mindfulness. I'm not going to give you a whole book on it. Let's give you a chapter. I call it Being. And it's a phrase I use in my head that triggers me down a good path. I say, be here now. When I was watching Star Trek with my husband, instead of crying in the corner about my son, I just said, well, let's be here now. This is good. So it's, reality. It is what it is. E for engagement. I think we're so isolated now. We forget to engage with other people. And if we just remember that we're all connected, that is a huge self-talk phrase that helps me when I pass the people who caused the traffic jam by fixing the road. If I just say we're all connected, then my thoughts go to, well, thank you. Thank you for leaving your family in the middle of the night and fixing my road. So tomorrow, if we remember that the person delivering our mail, we're connected to them, we need them. That is a huge part. And what is missing from a lot of gratitude lists? We're grateful for, but not grateful to. So, and then A for appreciation, T for trust. All will be well, maybe just not the way I planned, but somehow it's going to work out somehow. And when I do presentations on this, I always ask people to fill out something they thought they could never go through, yet they're here, and what did they learn? So it's interesting. And H is for humor. That is what I find is missing from so many of the books about being happier. My background is as an actor, voiceover talent, and a theater actor and a radio personality. And anytime, look, trauma aside, I'm not going to say I would joke about trauma on the radio, but if my kids were driving me crazy or my heel broke on the way to the wedding or whatever, it would make a really funny story the next day. And so that taught me the value of humor for those little things that might make us crabby, but you know what? They're a great story. Any bunch of theater actors get together and the stories they tell are never about the great nights they had. It's always about when the scenery fell on their head in the middle of the show, or I did a presentation and my nose started bleeding in the middle. So these little things become funny eventually. So if you can learn to laugh with others, not at others, a little sooner. And then the last E for esteem. Whatever happens, I'll handle it somehow. And that's what I say to myself in the situation we're in right now. Whatever happens, I've got help. I'll handle it, or we'll handle it somehow. So it's sort of a lighthearted book with stories and a key point and resources if you want to know more. But if you don't, here's the next chapter.
All right. So I missed the word you were giving us an acronym for.
Breathe.
Breathe? B-R-E-A-T-H-E? All right.
Yeah, instead of breath, breathe, because it's an action. So it's being, reality, engagement, acceptance, trust, humor, and esteem.
Excellent. And is that an acronym that you expound in the book that becomes the structure of the book?
Yeah.
Happier Made Simple?
Yeah, and it's got 7 core phrases, each. I'm sorry. I'll send you one if you want to read the book. I'll send you the Kindle or whatever you want. So there's I don't know if this is going to be on YouTube, but 7 core phrases: being, be here now, reality, it is what it is. This is sort of a, engagement. We're all connected. It's sort of a mix and match.
Excellent.
And if that phrase doesn't do it for you, you kind of make up your own. I struggled with engagement between we're all connected or find common ground because I thought they were both important. But I put that in the book too, because you can put your doubts in a book. I think that's important. And just appreciating, this is good. here we are on Zoom and we're chatting and I'm meeting a new person and we're talking about mental health. This is good. It's savoring the moment or reframing a bad moment. Maybe my son getting in trouble with the police will end up to have been good. Maybe it'll teach him a lesson. I don't know. I can't predict it, but I like.
Well, it's kind of like what you said earlier when you ask people for the last E in your acronym.
Esteem.
Whatever happens, we'll get through it. And then you ask people, what have you been through? And look at it, here you are. And let's, if it's far enough in the past, regardless of how intense it seemed at the time or negative at the time, can we look at how it has led directly or indirectly to some better things in our life today? Mm-hmm. And chances are it does.
It does. The sticking point for that, like I could say, oh, my son's illness turned me into an author and a podcast host, but I would give it all up if he was well.
Yeah, it's not, it isn't that so much as it is, oh, I'm so glad this happened. I'm never glad those things happened.
Right.
And yet the way I choose to interpret and respond to them creates my experience. And if I choose to make the best of it, use an acronym like yours and get centered and be here in the moment and, appreciate others and trust. And if I look for some humor and then I find I grow through that process rather than get hamstrung by it.
Right. I mean, it is partly the experience. We'd all rather open an envelope and get $100 check than $100 bill. I mean, that's just, sure, why not? But when you get it, the layer of what you tell yourself about it creates, like you say, creates that experience for you. So if you go, oh, poor me, the grumbling doesn't really help that much. And it's not a panacea. And I'm not, and I say at the beginning of the book, listen, this is not new. You go back to Aristotle, you go back to the Bible, you go back before the Bible. There were people considering this question. I don't like the word struggling with. I'm a big one of choose the right word. I never say I'm struggling to, I always say I'm striving to. If I catch myself going, oh, I have to go to the gym, I change it to, I get to go to the gym. Just a one word change can make a big difference because words are like little time bombs in our brain that lead us down one path or the other path. So that's the power of words and the words we use to each other. There's a PS at the end, by the way, when you're talking to other people, this matters too. But these 7 phrases are for self-talk. Don't say to anybody, oh, look on the bright side. That is the worst thing you can say to someone. Say it to yourself. Don't tell other people how to feel. But so I share these as self-help phrases that help me reframe whatever is happening and sends me down a different path. And be here now can be as simple as I'm brushing my teeth, but part of me in my head is already downstairs drinking coffee. And I'm like, wait a minute, be here now, brush your teeth, taste the toothpaste. And you can't be in the moment every second of every day. When I'm having a root canal, I do not want to be here now. I want to be fantasizing about the future or something else. But even then, you can choose if you want to have a happy thought about the future or an anxiety-ridden thought about the future. So there is some choice in what we tell ourselves about what's happening to us. Even something as serious as your beloved child having one of the worst illnesses that could possibly be. That's how I combine those 2 passions into 2 books.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, if you take a breath and get centered and think about it, so we're coming close to the end of my available time. If you think about it with whatever we've already hit on, is there something in there you want to go back and highlight or something we haven't mentioned yet that you want to share with our audience?
So I took a deep breath. I didn't know if that was for your listeners or for me, but I listened and took my deep breath. And I'd have to say, I'm just going to say what came to my mind first, which is that love is powerful. Everything we're doing, we do for love. It's a song from Chorus Line, What I Did for Love, I know. Also from Legally Blonde. I'm a musical theater junkie, so all my references are Broadway lyrics. But for my son to live with us for 9 years, when my husband and I waited up one of us to give him his medication to make sure he did it, although we never went to bed at the same time because he was working in a restaurant, we did it for love. We did it for love. when I reach the end of my days, whenever hopefully it's 30 years ahead, I want to look back and say, I did my best. And I loved as best I could, as many people as I could. And it can even be as simple as somebody took the parking space that I wanted. And I just, and I said to myself, I'll find another parking space. Maybe when you look at other people, assume good intent whenever possible. I think that would be something that really helps me not judge other people and not get mad at other people. Because when you get mad at that person for taking your parking space, you're assuming bad intent. You're assuming they saw you and they wanted to screw you over and they took your space. What if they were, talking to their daughter on the phone and they just didn't see you? And if I'm going to make something up in my imagination about that person, I'm going to make up the good thing. And so
it's going to generate your experience in that moment.
Exactly. And
the story you make up creates your experience.
Exactly. The story you make up. So I'd rather make up a good story. And if life proves me wrong, you know what? I can be wrong. I can change my mind. I think that's the hardest thing for people to say is I was wrong. And I've learned to say I was wrong. I used to think marijuana didn't cause schizophrenia. You know what? I think I was wrong. I've changed my mind about that. And I think that's how we learn from each other. So I would say, if you're going to make up a story about someone, assume good intent. And if you find that new information comes in and the opinion you held so strongly might not be right, say, you know what? I think I was wrong. And then you'll be happier.
Excellent. Well, I greatly appreciate your being willing to share time with us. The podcast again is Three Mothers.
Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches.
Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. And the two books. If you
Google podcast, Schizophrenia Moms, it'll come up.
It'll be there. And the two books are Ben Behind His Voices.
Yeah, that's my book. The other two books of the other two moms are a little more recent. Fix What You Can by Mindy Greiling. She was a state legislator in Minnesota when her son was getting ill. So there's a lot of the story, but the legal battle behind it. And He Came In With It by Miriam Feldman. She's an artist on the West Coast, and she talks about her experience. They're all beautifully written. And my other book is Happier Made Simple. Choose Your Words, Change Your Life.
Excellent. Well, I would be happy to take you up on the offer of your book, and I will look forward to reading it. And if you keep doing this for another half a year or so, maybe we'll have you back on. Maybe we can get all three of you together on a podcast. And
I'm sure we'd love to.
And I would look forward to that.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time. It's a blessing. Randye Kaye has two best-selling books, Happier Made Simple and Ben Behind His Voices. These two books are tied to her work as a motivational speaker, a radio and podcast host, an actress, a singer, a teacher, and a mental health advocate. It's also tied to her life as a wife, mother, and grandmother. She is the co-creator and host of the popular podcast Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.